Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome to our monthly gospel class. We are going chronologically, and we're going to discuss today the first chapter, which has a specific date. Before that, there were kind of vaguer dates. March 1882, something like February 1882. This is the first date which is given directly, March 11th, 1882. So from now on, I'll be including the date in the title of the gospel class to make it easier to read along, follow along. So I'll read to you, it's about a 2-page chapter, and I want to get through the whole thing. So I've split into 3 parts, so I'll read the first part of it first. So in Nikhilanji's translation, in the company of devotees, March 11th, 1882. About 8 o'clock in the morning, Sri Ramakrishna went as planned to Balaram Bose's house in Kolkata. It was the day of the Dol Jatra. Ram, Monomohan, Rakhal, Nitya Gopal, and other devotees were with him. M too came as bidden by the master. The devotees and the master sang and danced in a state of divine fervor. Several of them were in an ecstatic mood. Nitya Gopal's chest glowed with the upsurge of emotion, and Rakhal lay on the floor in ecstasy, completely unconscious of the world. The master put his hand on Rakhal's chest and said, "Peace, be quiet." This was Rakhal's first experience of ecstasy. He lived with his father in Kolkata and now and then visited the master at Dakhineshwar. About this time, he had studied a short while in Vidyasagar school at Shampukur. When the music was over, the devotees sat down for their meal. Balaram stood there humbly like a servant. Nobody would have taken him for the master of the house. M was still a stranger to the devotees, having met only Narendra at Dakhineshwar. So let's pause there. A few things. There's a section heading here, which is not translated by Nikhilanji. The section heading is Sri Ramakrishna Balaram Mundire Bhakta Sange Premanande Nritya, which means Sri Ramakrishna's dancing with the bliss of love of God, along with other devotees in the house of Balaram Bose, his devotee, householder devotee. Okay. And this is a wonderful scene sketched here, where not just Sri Ramakrishna, but so many others who are with him are going into high states of spiritual ecstasy while dancing to these devotional songs. And I'd point to, okay, there are a couple things here. You might say technicalities, but still, it's worth mentioning. It's mentioned that it was a day of the Dol Yatra, which is a certain Vaishnava festival. March 11th. But in the original Bengali, there's a footnote to that statement, which says, I'll just summarize. Basically, Dol Jatra 7 din pore hobe, which means actually the Dol Yatra was 7 days later. And so it's not quite accurate to say that this was the day of the Dol Yatra. How do we know this? Because M himself writes that this happened on 11th March, and it's known from the almanacs that the Dol Yatra took place 7 days after the 11th of March, on the 18th of March. Okay, so that's one small thing. It was not actually the day of Dol Yatra. Secondly, Nikhilanji uses a number of different terms somewhat synonymously here, like the master sang and danced in a state of divine fervor. Divine fervor. Several of them were in ecstatic mood. Nitya Gopal's chest glowed with the upsurge of emotion. These are different kinds of words. This was Rakhal's first experience of ecstasy. Now, what is the original Bengali here? Almost always the term used is bhava, bhav. And I think that might be missed in the English because Nikalanji is using different terms, right? But it's actually all, so I'll just give you an example. So, Koekti bhaktir bhava avastha hoiyache, bhava avastha. Several devotees are in the state of bhava avastha, bhava, okay. Nitya Gopalet bhava avasthai bokkhosthal ruktim borno hoiyache. Nitya Gopal state, he's also in bhava avastha, the same word is used. Nitya Gopal's chest glowed with the upsurge of emotion, is Nikalanji's translation. But again, it's the same word. So this is one thing to be aware of, is that it's almost a technical spiritual term. It's very difficult to translate. Spiritual ecstasy. And then Rakal, Shuya Achin. Rakal is lying on the floor. Bhava avishto o bhajyogen shunno. Bhava, again the word bhava. Bhava avishta. Overcome with bhava, overcome by bhava. And then there's this interesting statement, Rakaler ei prothom bhava avastha. This was Rakal's first experience of bhava, spiritual ecstasy. Another footnote, which is not in the translation. So this is in the original Bengali. The Bengali footnote adds, this is not his first experience of bhava, it's his second. Okay, so there are two couple corrections here, which are made. This M himself makes these mistakes, and then the Bengali editor is pointing out M's mistakes, and Nikalanji does not point out M's mistakes. Basically, that's the difference here. So what are the two mistakes, apparently? Number one, M says that it was a day of the Dola Yatra, but in fact, it was 7 days before Dola Yatra. Second error made by M is that this was actually Rakal's second experience of bhava, not his first. Yeah?
Was this corrections by editor made much later? Did
I think so.
Maybe older one without these?
It's possible. I have no idea. Well, yeah, maybe the reason why Nikalanji doesn't include it is because the corrections were made much later, even after Nikalanji's time. That's possible. Yeah.
In spirit, was the bhav, because bhav had different meanings in Swami Saradananda's the great master.
Oh.
Is that why Swami Nityananda is translating, even though I'm not read it all as if they're all bhav, but I'm sure there was differences in the actual word the bhav meant.
Well,
he's translating.
Well, it's difficult to know why Nikalanji is not using the same term. You mentioned Sharadananda's Lila Prasanga, but the thing is, it gets confusing because there's a term that's used frequently in the Lila Prasanga to refer to a very different experience of Sri Ramakrishna. It's called Bhava Mukha.
Yeah.
Bhava Mukha is not the same thing as Bhav.
Yeah.
Although once in the Kathamrita, when Sri Ramakrishna is referring to this incident when he's immersed in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and Divine Mother says to him, in the Lila Prasanga it's recorded as, remain in the state of Bhava Mukha. But there's one place in Kathamrita, it comes later, where Sri Ramakrishna himself says, Divine Mother told me, bhave thako, stay in bhava. But this bhava is different from the bhava that we're talking about here. So it gets confusing, the word bhava. And bhava has many different meanings, actually. It could just mean spiritual attitude.
And that's why I'm assuming in translation he tried to...
Well, yeah, but the problem is, how can he know? Nikalanji, he wasn't there. So on what basis is he going to make these subtle distinctions between Nitya Gopal's bhava, a state of ecstasy, and Rakal's? And you'd have to be there, right? So that's one possibility, but I don't find that plausible. Whatever the reason, just keep that in mind, that the word bhava is used throughout here. And, okay, so I'm going to read the next section. There's a new section heading, which is Sarva Dharma Samanvaya, the harmonization of all the world's religions and spiritual paths. So, this section. A few days later, M visited the master at Dakshineshwar. It was between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The master and he were sitting on the steps of the Shiva temples. Looking at the temple of Radhakanta across the courtyard, the master went into an ecstatic mood. Since his nephew Hriday's dismissal from the temple, Sri Ramakrishna had been living without an attendant. On account of his frequent spiritual moods, he could hardly take care of himself. The lack of an attendant caused him great inconvenience. Sri Ramakrishna was talking to Kali, the Divine Mother of the universe. He said, "Mother, everyone says my watch alone is right. The Christians, the Brahmos, the Hindus, the Musalmans all say my religion alone is true. But mother, the fact is that nobody's watch is right. Who can truly understand thee? But if a man prays to thee with a yearning heart, he can reach thee through thy grace by any path. Mother, show me sometime how the Christians pray to thee in their churches. But mother, what will people say if I go in? Suppose they make a fuss. Suppose they don't allow me to enter the Kali temple again. Well then, show me the Christian worship from the door of the church." It's wonderful to see Sri Ramakrishna speaking with his mother, Divine Mother, so freely. It's really extraordinary. These are the kinds of moments when people say that when they meet Sri Ramakrishna, they feel that he makes God feel, it's as if God is right there. There are moments like this. The other thing is, some of these statements are really interesting. So first of all, he's looking at the Krishna temple in the same premises, right? It's a Kali temple, the Dakshineswar, but there's 12 Shiva temples, and there's also this Radhakanta temple with Krishna. And while looking at that Krishna image, he goes into this state of ecstasy and starts speaking to Divine Mother about the harmony of religions. So one question I have for you guys, why do you think that his vision of Krishna, this image of Krishna, is what prompts him to speak to Divine Mother about the harmony of religions? What might be the connection? Oh, what's your suggestion? Do you have a mic? Can we give it to...
Well, I think it from what you've been teaching us about the Bhagavad Gita, it's the harmony of religions is in there as well.
In the Gita?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so thinking about that and thinking about Krishna, it would make sense that would be why he would be in that kind of a thought process.
Okay, that's interesting. So one suggestion is that because Krishna taught the Gita, and when Sri Ramakrishna saw Krishna, he might have been reminded of the Gita, and the Gita is all about harmonizing different religious paths. So that's one suggestion. Any other possibilities? Yeah, Nishan?
Krishna.
Yeah, here, take the mic. Thank you.
Krishna as an avatara. The next thought might be Christ as an avatara, and the thought of, now I'm talking about Christianity. That's one. A second thing I was thinking is how, the Bhakti Mala was being read. I think was reading the Bhakti Mala, and Sri Ramakrishna, it's nice, but there's some dogmatic views.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes when he thinks of Vaishnavism, he meets a lot of these Goswamis who are very when he sees Krishna, he thinks, oh, what a pity that these people think their way is the right way.
The last thing you said is what I immediately thought of, which is, because whenever Vaishnavas come, he'll encourage them and say, this is wonderful, your devotion for Krishna, but don't be so one-sided. And he'll say the same thing to Shaktas also. And so maybe when he saw Krishna, he was thinking of Vaishnavas who are so full of devotion, and yet at the same time, sometimes, not all Vaishnavas, but some seem to think that their religion or their tradition, their God is higher than, greater than, better than other paths. And Sri Ramakrishna feels bad about that, and so he's maybe. So that's another. Any other suggestions?
Not related to that.
Okay.
Not suggestion related to that, but when you said he's looking at Krishna and talking to Mother, I was just trying to remember, has he ever spoken to anyone other than Mother? I know he has kind of described his experiences with about all gods and how they merge in him, but it feels like whenever he's actually talking to God, so to say, usually it seems to be to the Mother all the time, even whatever may be the topic.
Whatever might be the what?
Whatever may be the thing, it's
Mother
usually...
is his Ishtadevata, of course.
Yeah.
So he's always speaking to his...
Yeah, so that's why even though he's seeing Krishna, I think as in all other places, usually who he talks to seems to be Mother.
No, that's true. I don't think we disagree about... Yeah, that's certainly true. Yeah.
No, I didn't think of it until you mentioned.
Okay. Yeah,
he looked at Krishna and he was talking to Mother, you mentioned, so I didn't...
I see, so it might seem like it's odd, like why...
Yeah.
Why would he not...
Yeah, and then I kind of remember that most of the time he's only talking to Mother.
Right. But of course, he saw Mother as Sarvadeva Devi Surupini, and so he saw her as the embodiment of all gods and goddesses. And okay, good. So that was interesting. Different suggestions. But that's quite striking. Looking at Krishna and then suddenly talking to Divine Mother about the harmony of religions. So all three things we have to somehow sort of try to combine and make sense of. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention, what he tells Mother. But Mother, the fact is that nobody's watch is right. This is something he repeats in many places in the Gospel. Nobody's watch is right. This is very startling, actually, because it means no religion is 100% true. Not even Hinduism, not his own home tradition, no tradition. And that if all religious practitioners just acknowledge that fact, they would be more humble, less likely to put down other paths. And in the next sentence, I really like the way he explains in what sense nobody's watch is right. He says, who can truly understand thee? So the Bangla here is, Tomake thik ke bujhte parbe. Who can rightly understand you? Now, what does he mean by this? What do you guys think? Yeah.
So it's always that the true understanding is beyond the personal intellect. If you have an identity, it's a limit. So you're not going to see the truth unless you become the truth. Mm-hmm. It's like you can't fit the ocean in your cup. You have to throw your cup into the ocean.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So I think there are two different ways of explaining interpreting what you're saying. One is this more extreme Advaitic interpretation that you literally have to become God in order to know God.
Yeah.
The only problem with that, if you really push that extreme view, I don't think you'll be able to do justice to the broadness of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. Because
to the what?
To the broadness of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. Because he says that there are two different ideals for different kinds of soul. One type wants to become sugar. The other type wants to eat sugar. And he doesn't say one is higher than the other. But if you mean in a less extreme way, that the goal is realization of God, spiritual realization, direct experience, rather than just sort of intellectual understanding, then I think I would agree with you about that. Yeah.
Can you describe, is it kind of like describing, like thinking more like a stepping stone? Like,
think of what as a stepping stone? Like the religious stuff?
Yeah. The information and all of it, because it's an attempt to merge or whatever you're seeking.
Yeah, no, I think that's a nice point. He says somewhere else in the Gospel, he says, Mot kichu ishur noy. Every religious doctrine is a path, but don't confuse the path for God. And in the danger, because once you equate the path with God, then you get all sorts of fanaticism and exclusivism and one-sidedness. So I think that's also plausible. And one thing, anyone else have their hand up? No. One thing I would suggest is, I would link this to his many teachings about the nature of God as infinite. The infinite God, he says, you can never place a limit to God. Bhagavana kono iti nahi. You can never say he is just this and no more. So I think one way of interpreting what he's saying is every religion, in a certain sense, is forced to limit God in some respect. Say, so Quran says God is Allah, which is, it's not that it's not true, but that God is also more than Allah, you see. Christianity says God is God the Father and Christ. True, says Sri Ramakrishna, but God is also beyond that. Vaishnavas say God is Krishna. True, but God is also Kali and God is also Ganesha. So because God is infinite, this is my suggestion, because God is infinite, you can never adequately express that infinitude of God. Because you'd have to just keep talking forever. And, these religious scriptures have sort of beginnings and ends. And so that's another thing I was thinking. And to bring in some technical terms from philosophy of religion here that might help us or it might confuse us, we'll see. There's what's called apophatic theology and cataphatic theology. Has anyone heard of either of these terms? No? You also know. Okay, so apophatic theology means... So people consider Meister Eckhart, for instance, to be an apophatic theologian, the great Christian mystic. Shankara, arguably, is an apophatic philosopher. What does it mean? It means when they try to explain the nature of ultimate reality, they can only say what it is not what it is. That's apophaticism. It's a fancy term, but it means something quite simple. Neti neti, the famous statement about the nature of Brahman in which Upanishad? I've quizzed you about this before, some of you who may have been in the room. Which Upanishad says neti neti? No, not Taittiriya.
I've never heard you ask that.
Oh, maybe you weren't there at the class. I'm pretty sure. Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. Remember it. I might quiz you in the future.
Pronounce it
Huh?
Pronounce it again?
Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, the Great Forest Upanishad.
Well, that's what Taittiriya says, iti.
Neti.
He learns that each one. Actually.
Yeah, so neti neti is there. So neti neti is a beautiful example in the Upanishads of apophatic theology. You say what Brahman is not, but not what it is. Cataphatic theology is exactly the opposite. It's saying what God is. Ramanuja does that. So Shankara was an apophatic theologian in the sense that he says Brahman is neti neti. You can't say anything about it. It's nirguna, nirvishesha, without qualities, right? Without attributes, not personal. But what it is, he doesn't say. Ramanuja says, no, it's ananta kalyana guna, vishishta. God is Vishnu, Narayana. First of all, it's the first attribute. He's saying it's Vishnu. I know what God is. God is Vishnu. Secondly, Vishnu is omnipotent. Thirdly, Vishnu is omniscient. Fourthly, he loves us, and so on and so forth. These are all positive attributes. Cataphatic. K-A-T-A-P-H-A-T-I-C. Cataphatic theology. Apophatic theology. A-P-O-P-H-A-T-I-C. Apophatic theology. So now, coming here, the reason why I bring in these terms, because
Would cataphatic be the Vijnana? The seeing God in everything?
I want to say the Vijnana standpoint encompasses both apophaticism and cataphatism. That's the beauty of it, because he says the Vijnani sees that divine reality, which is nirguna, is also saguna, which is apophatic, is also cataphatic. So it encompasses both. Now, there's a strictly apophatic way of interpreting what Sri Ramakrishna is saying here. But mother, the fact is that nobody's watch is right. Who can truly understand thee? One way of understanding that, if you're just an apophatic theologian, you can say, yes, what he means is every religion gets God wrong. And why is that? Because God is beyond all description, and nothing you can say about God is strictly accurate. But I don't think that's quite true to Sri Ramakrishna's position. I think it's truer to his position to say that every religion gets God right, actually, but that no religion can capture the whole of God. Just like, imagine the ant. Think about the ant parable. Well, hold on. Let's go. Let's stick with the ant first. Let's stick with the ant first, please. One animal at a time. Okay. So the ant goes to a hill of sugar, says Sri Ramakrishna, and the ant, with great difficulty, picks up one grain of sugar. Not with his hands, but somehow. And this is not accurate. And he gets puffed up with pride, and he says, next time I'm going to take the whole hill with me, the whole hill of sugar. And he says, but can anyone do that? Just by realizing God in one aspect, you become intoxicated, you've attained liberation. You can't fathom what God is in his or her infinitude. So that's why I think it's more directly relevant, because of... So every religion is like that ant. And saying something quite... It's a real grain of sugar. Yes. Because God lovingly manifests in the form that we love to see him in, or think about and meditate on. So God will manifest as Christ or God the Father to Christians, as Allah to Muslims, as Krishna to Vaishnavas, as Kali to Shaktas, and so on and so forth, you see. So they're all true. All these different forms of God are true. It's not that only the unthinkable, indescribable, apophatic God is true. It's not that. The cataphatic God is also true, but God is always beyond all of his positive attributes and all of his forms. Okay, so that's why I brought in those terms. I hope that they're helpful to you, and you can impress your friends at a cocktail party.
Swamiji?
Yeah.
There's a really nice question online, which is directly related to this. Can a Vijnani eventually both be sugar and eat sugar? Mm-hmm. I know it's a high aspiration, but it appeals and calls to me.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah, but
That's what I want to do also.
Yeah,
Right.
we're sugar. We're eating ourselves.
yeah,
I
but the
like
thing
that.
is, that's to become a Vijnani, you first have to become sugar, then you eat sugar.
Yeah.
Because remember the staircase analogy, which I say like in every lecture? Climbing up the stairs is neti neti. You reach the roof, which is nirvikalpa samadhi, which is knowledge of Brahman. That's becoming sugar. It's the salt doll which goes to measure the depth of the ocean. Once it sets foot in the ocean, it melts. That's your becoming God. That's becoming sugar. That's jnana. That's not vijnana yet. Reaching the roof is jnana. How do you attain vijnana? After attaining the state of jnana, the vijnani sees that the steps are made of the same material as a roof, brick slime and brick dust. And then the Vijnani sees that that reality which is nirguna is also saguna. That reality which is non-dual pure consciousness is also the personal God, which has become the 24 cosmic principles. And then when the Vijnani comes back from the state of samadhi, nirvikalpa samadhi, he then sports in this world as a playmate of the personal God, of the playmate of Shakti, and serves everyone in a spirit of worship by seeing Shakti in everyone, and so on and so forth. So that's the eating sugar paradigm. So the Vijnana, in order to attain the state of Vijnana, you first have to become sugar, which is jnana, Brahma jnana, and then you can eat sugar to your heart's content without getting cavities. Yeah. Okay. All right, good. So there we go. We all want to be Vijnanis. Easier said than done. Okay. But by God's grace, anything is possible.
You said it's easier now than ever.
I think so. I see Sri Ramakrishna as having democratized Vijnana. He's made it accessible to everyone by his grace, by his infinite grace. And what was only available to a tiny minority of souls, Ishvarakotis in particular. He said only Ishvarakotis, typically he would say, can attain the state of Vijnana. Who are Ishvarakotis? Avatar ba avatarer ongsho. Avatars, incarnations of God. None of us here are probably incarnations. Or avatarer ongsho, which means portions of an incarnation. Those who are born as parts of an incarnation. We may not be that either, but there's still hope for us, as I said, because when you look at some of his main disciples and the way that they explain his teachings in his vision, they seem to, like Swami Vivekananda I'm thinking of, and Sri Aurobindo, and others, Swami Turiyanandaji, in his letters, in his work, they don't emphasize so much that Vijnana is a rarefied state for only a few souls. They say that anybody can attain it. Seems like Sri Ramakrishna opened the floodgates to Vijnana for everyone. Okay, now let me complete the section because there's quite a bit more to discuss here. Another day. Oh, new section heading. What's the section heading? Bhakto Shonge Bhajananande Rakhal Prem. And then in quotes, Preme Shura. So these three titles are split by M dashes. Okay. Bhakto Shonge Bhajananande means in the bliss of taking God's name or singing God's name, bhajans, bhajanananda, Bhakto Shonge, with other devotees. Rakhal Prem, the love of Rakhal, of the cowherd for Krishna. And then the quotation is Preme Shura, because this is something that Sri Ramakrishna himself will say. Preme Shura. Prem means love. Shura means wine. The wine of divine love. So that's the section heading. So that sets the scene. So now I'll read the section. Another day, the master was seated on a small couch in his room with his usual beaming countenance. M arrived with Kali Krishna, who did not know where his friend M was taking him. He had only been told, "If you want to see a grog shop, then come with me. You will see a huge jar of wine there." M related this to Sri Ramakrishna, who laughed about it. The master said, "The bliss of worship and communion with God is the true wine, the wine of ecstatic love. The goal of human life is to love God. Bhakti is the one essential thing. To know God through jnana and reasoning is extremely difficult." Then the master saying, "Who is there that can understand what Mother Kali is? Even the 6 darshanas are powerless to reveal her." Now, the thing is, I find this a little annoying, is that the full song is not given here. There's ... because he has a full song only once somewhere else, but I have it here on my phone, so I'm going to read the rest of it. Okay. "It is she," the scriptures say, "that is the inner self of the yogi, who in self discovers all his joy. She that of her own sweet will inhabits every living thing. The macrocosm and microcosm rest in the mother's womb. Now do you see how vast it is? In the Muladhara, the yogi meditates on her, and in the Sahasrara, who but Shiva has beheld her as she really is? Within the lotus wilderness, she sports beside her mate, the swan. When man aspires to understand her, Ram Prasad must smile. Ram Prasad is the singer, the composer. To think of knowing her, he says, is quite as laughable as to imagine one can swim across the boundless sea. But while my mind has understood, alas, my heart has not. Though but a dwarf, it still would strive to make a captive of the moon. It's a very beautiful translation, actually.
He sings it to Vidyasagar.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah. Oh, I think he sings it the whole full too. It's just that I think Niklanji just gives the dot, because in the original Bangla, the full song is given every time he sings it. Yeah. Okay, let me complete the section, then we'll get back to the song and other things. The master said again, the one goal of life is to cultivate love for God, the love that the milkmaids, the milkmen, and the cowherd boys of Vrindavan felt for Krishna. When Krishna went away to Mathura, the cowherds roamed about, weeping bitterly because of their separation from him. Saying this, the master sang, with his eyes turned upward. Just now I saw a youthful cowherd with a young calf in his arms. There he stood, by one hand holding the branch of a young tree. Where are you, brother Kanai? He cried. But Kanai scarcely could he utter. Ka was as much as he could say. He cried, where are you, brother? And his eyes were filled with tears. When M heard this song of the master's, laden with love, his eyes were moist with tears. That's how the section ends. A few things. So right before he sings the first song in this section, Sri Ramakrishna mentions, so in the translation, the master said, the bliss of worship and communion with God is the true wine, the wine of ecstatic love. Now, the terms here I think are important. He says, Thakur bolilen, bhajananando brahmanando e anandi shura, preme shura. So there are actually other places in the gospel where he uses these terms, but he uses a third term as well. The two terms used here are bhajanananda and brahmananda. What's the third term used? Any experts of the gospel who can give me the third term? These are the three terms he uses, comparing different kinds of, like in Gita we have three kinds of happiness, sattvika sukham, rajasika sukham, tamasika.
Shayananda, Bhajananda, Brahmananda.
Yeah, it's not actually like that in the I mean, there are ideas there in Taitiriya Upanishad, but these are Sri Ramakrishna's terms, exactly, Vishayananda. So the third term is Vishayananda. In the gospel, in a number of places, Sri Ramakrishna says there are three different kinds of joy. The first kind of joy is Vishayananda. Vishaya here means sense pleasures, sense objects. The pleasure that you derive from sense objects. That's like, what does that correspond to in the Gita? Rajasika Sukham. Vishayendriya Sanyogad Yattadagreh Mritopamam Parinami Vishmiva Tatsukham Rajasam Sutam. Rajasika happiness is happiness born from the contact of the sense organs with sense objects. What's the nature of all sense pleasures? In the beginning, they are like nectar. In the end, they are like poison. Okay. So that's like what Sri Ramakrishna calls Vishayananda. Second kind of ananda, he says, is bhajanananda. The joy of singing God's name and singing God's glories. So he uses that term here, you see. Because what? He's singing about God. And that's why the section heading of M is Bhakta Shunge Bhajanananda. Remember, it's the same word used. So with the bliss of, this is not the bliss of sense pleasures. This is the bliss of taking God's name and singing God's name. But there's an even higher pleasure than that. What can be higher? Brahmananda, he says. It's funny because two of these terms are names of prominent monks in our order. One is Brahmananda, the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna. The other is a still living monk, a vice president of our order in Belumat named Swami Bhajananandaji. And there's a Kali Mandir Bhajanananda as well. Okay, so Brahmananda. Well, let me ask you, what is the difference between Bhajanananda and Brahmananda? Brahma means Brahma, the Ananda of Brahman. So what's the difference?
One is eating sugar, one is being sugar.
Which one is which?
Brahmananda.
Can you give the mic? Okay. Say it again once you get the mic.
Bhajanananda is the tasting of eating sugar. Brahmananda is being sugar.
Okay, that's interesting. I hadn't thought
But
about
the
that.
Kashmir Shaiva point here is if it's a feeling, Brahmananda, then that must mean that being sugar has a capacity of tasting itself. There must be a vimarsha there.
Okay, well, that's getting too technical in Kashmiri Shaivite for our purposes tonight. But
I don't like that idea personally. Sorry.
can you give her the mic?
If you're
One second. Wait. Just wait. Hold your horses. Okay.
I like you, Nishan. I just don't like that idea
Yeah.
because I wouldn't think that Ramakrishna would say something of eating sugar of a bhakta sort would be a lesser something than Brahma something, which would be a jnana something of being sugar.
Okay, so that's
that would be
one
the
point against, or one objection to this idea that Bhajanananda means eating sugar and Brahmananda means becoming sugar.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It would just make a hierarchy that he wouldn't do.
He does.
Well, no, not necessarily. So
You did.
I just said so, but that's because I was.
Well,
giving
why
my-
would you put words in his mouth?
Well, no. But
In Ramakrishna.
Maybe I was, but
Yeah, you said that he said there was one even higher than
But that's because
Bhajanananda.
I have a different interpretation from Nishant about this. So I take Brahmananda to mean realization of God.
Ah,
That's how I see
I see,
it. That's how I've always taken it. But I never thought about your interpretation. But I see Brahmananda as realizing God,
I'm
as spiritual knowledge of God. Whereas Bhajanananda is, we can all do bhajans now, as we do when we, that doesn't mean we realize God. So the bliss of realization, it far exceeds anything else. And of course, you can sing bhajans after having realized God. That's also, so it's not that the two can't go together. But to me, especially, there are other places where he actually defines these three terms, and I think he makes it clear that's why I think that. So it may not just be me. I think that I can look it up. I should have looked it up actually. That's part of the point of preparing. Yeah. Okay. So I'll do that. Note to self: if I remember 1 month from now when our next class is. But I'll try to look up how he defines precisely Brahmananda. I'm pretty sure it's realization of God.
But you didn't have the answer.
Yeah. Well, I have an answer, but I don't have the evidence to back up the answer. That's embarrassing for me in particular because I give other people a hard time for not giving evidence. Okay.
Where's the textual evidence?
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, I'm going to find the textual evidence and then get back to you. How about that? All right. Okay, so that's one thing I wanted to point out. And the thing is, in Niklajanji's translation, these terms are kind of occluded because he says, notice, so Sri Ramakrishna is saying Bhajanananda, Brahmananda, E Anandi Shura. So he used these two terms, Bhajanananda, Brahmananda. And in the original, in the English translation, it's the bliss of worship and communion with God. It's not at all obvious to me that the bliss of... You can figure it out once you know what the original Bengali terms are, but it's not easy to figure it out unless you know what the original terms are. So the bliss of worship of God would correspond to Bhajanananda. And the bliss of communion with God is Brahmananda. So Niklajanji also agrees with my interpretation, but as far as I can tell. Communion with God meaning direct realization of God. Well, I guess you could...
Direct realization does not mean communion. It means...
Yeah, communion may support... Yeah, but again... I'm going to look up the evidence. I'll get the textual reference.
Right, but I just think that...
No, I don't think he is, though.
Wait, I have to admit, the only reason I'm saying that is because when I studied Ananda Mimamsa, I studied it with a very Advaitic commentary. So I've only ever studied Taittiriya Advaitically. So
Right.
It makes sense that they would understand that Brahmananda...
Yeah, then obviously there's going to be a hierarchy with Advaita at the top. But no, I'm almost certain, but I will verify this and then get back to you. But remind me if I forget. In the next class, 1 month from now. Okay. But I'm pretty sure Sri Ramakrishna himself defines Brahmananda as direct realization of God. Okay. The other thing I wanted to point out is how he describes the goal of life. What is the goal of life? He doesn't say God realization here. He says something more specific. That's the interesting thing.
Love of God.
To love God, that's the interesting thing. Sometimes he'll say the goal of life is to realize God or to attain God. Ishwar Labh. Ishwar Labh means the attainment of God. Here, the term is different. And he says it again and again, not once, but 2 or 3 times. The goal of life, so I'll read the original Bengali. Manob jiboner uddesho, meaning the goal of life. Ishore prem, Ishorke bhalobasha, is the love of God. To love God. So he repeats it twice in the same sentence. Next sentence, bhakti ishar. Bhakti is the essential thing. Gyan vichar kore Ishorke jana boroi kothin. Through jnana and vichara, through intellectual reasoning, jnana yoga, Ishorke jana boroi kothin. It's extremely difficult to know God in that way, to realize God in that way. And then again at the end of the section, or right before he sings the second song, he says, Thakur Shri Ramakrishna abar bole diyechen, Ishorke bhalobasha, eiti jiboner uddesho. He repeats the third time. To love God, this is the goal of life. 3 times he says this. So I think this is very significant, actually. Part of the reason is because, first of all, I think it contradicts any attempt to claim that for Sri Ramakrishna, the highest goal must be Advaitic realization. And some of the devotees who visited him, that are recorded in the gospel, they tried to push him in that direction. Mohima Chakraborty is an example. A householder disciple, was a follower of Shankara. And he asked him this question point blank. Bhaktaro kintu nirvan chai. He says, even bhaktas, devotees of the personal God, have to eventually attain nirvana, becoming God, like Narayana says, or this becoming sugar paradigm, right? Sri Ramakrishna says emphatically, no, that's not the case. In some views, there's Nitya Krishna, Nitya Bhakta, the eternal Krishna and his eternal devotees. Chinmoy Sham, Chinmoy Dham. Krishna's abode is eternal, and Krishna himself is the same consciousness, same divine consciousness. And then, in that context, he also says there's such a thing as Nitya Shakad. There's an eternal form of God. Not that you have to transcend the form of God to attain oneness with non-dual pure consciousness. So these kinds of statements, the goal of life is to love God, strongly suggest that there doesn't have to be some higher Advaitic realization beyond bhakti. I think it's very clear.
Doesn't that say somewhere that it is a byproduct of it, though? That, like, God realization is a byproduct of having that ultimate love for God?
Not God realization, but that mukti,
okay.
liberation, is
That's what I
an
meant.
incidental
I'm sorry.
byproduct.
And is that...
in Vaishnava traditions.
Okay.
Yeah. And they say that knowledge of Brahman is a very minor thing compared to the realization of Krishna. This is a Vaishnava tradition. I don't want to place Sri Ramakrishna into that Vaishnava position. That would be another kind of, I think, a sectarian interpretation of Sri Ramakrishna. Say, see, he's supporting Vaishnavism here. And in fact, one of the regular attendees of my Gita class, the Bhagavad Gita and the Life of Sri Ramakrishna, he's trying to kind of turn the tables on Shankara and interpret Sri Ramakrishna as basically a Vaishnava, putting the personal God above the Advaitins, and saying that the knowers of non-dual pure consciousness somehow they're going to be forced to come back to this world again. They don't get full liberation. So I think it would be a serious mistake to interpret these statements of Sri Ramakrishna in that way, to say that he's placing the goal of bhakti on an even higher footing than Advaita Vedanta. I don't think he's doing that. I think that's why it's very important to take his teachings as a whole and to see everything in context. I never see him saying that eating sugar is superior to becoming sugar. I also don't see the opposite. I don't see him saying anywhere that becoming sugar is higher than eating sugar. I think that I think he thinks it's a matter of temperament. First you had a question, and then Bala. Yeah.
So when he says the goal of life is to love God, what does he mean by God? What is that reference to? Is it like a dualistic, being separate from God?
I think
and
it has
God?
to be personal. See, the thing about love is you can't love something unless you're distinct from it.
Yeah.
It seems logical to me. You have to have,
So is there a particular God that he's talking about? I mean,
of course. Well, the personal God, Shakti, in any form. That's how I see it.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, Bala had a question.
Comment and a question. I think he does indicate that realizing the non-dual thing is harder. He doesn't put hierarchy, but he says that, I think, very clearly.
Sure. Yeah.
But I also kind of remember Sri Ramakrishna talking about you can think of God as formless or with form.
Correct.
So my question is, it seems like you can still love a formless God, and it doesn't necessarily mean formless is equal to the non-dual way of thinking.
Remember, I think you were at that Gita class when I distinguished 4 different Sanskrit terms. Nirakara, Sakara, and Saguna and Nirguna.
Yeah.
They're not the same.
Right.
So Nirakara means formless, but you can be formless and still be Saguna, personal.
Yeah.
Allah, in Islamic theology, is the formless, the personal God.
Yes. Just confirming. Yeah.
But that Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, the Brahman there, is Nirakara Nirguna.
Right.
It's not only
and
formless,
that's the harder one.
Without qualities, without any attributes. Yeah. So now, coming back to this interesting question of, Sri Ramakrishna does say that it's harder. So does Gita, chapter 12. Kleshodikaraste-sham avyakta sakta-chetasam. That's true. Now, the thing is, he also says the opposite in a certain sense, because he loves singing one particular song where he's ventriloquizing Kali herself, Divine Mother. Ami mukti dite kator noy, shuddha bhakti dite kator hoy. Kali is saying in this beautiful song, I can give liberation. I don't have a problem giving liberation. What I'm very hesitant to give is Shuddha Bhakti, pure devotion for me. And then he says in other places, there's that metaphor he uses about like a giant mansion, and he says, Jnana can only take you to the outer precincts of this mansion. Bhakti can take you into the inner sanctum, into the inner, where the women live, and he uses kind of metaphors. Vijnana compared to jnana, right? Again, jnana is knowledge of non-dual pure consciousness, this Advaita jnana. Vijnana, he says, is bishesh rupe jnana. You have a more intimate, deeper, more expansive and comprehensive knowledge of God. Okay, that's one thing. And secondly, just because something is harder doesn't make it better or higher. That's also, I think, significant. And an analogy we can use is, if you're trying to get to a roof, there are different ways of doing it. You can climb a staircase, which is relatively easy. You can ride an elevator, even easier, because you literally don't have to exert any effort at all. And then there's a toughest route. What is that? Climbing a rope. Maybe only 5% of people are able to climb the rope. Even among those people who can climb the rope, let's just pause it. It takes 10 seconds to get up to the roof by climbing the rope. It might take 5 seconds to reach the roof by the elevator. Even though it's harder. You see, everybody can ride the elevator, but the elevator can take you up there more quickly than climbing the rope. I'm just saying as a hypothetical scenario. So it's not just because something is harder doesn't make it better. Even though that is a kind of common assumption, I think.
Yeah.
Direct.
Yeah.
I had a question on that. The reference you made, God says, I'll give you liberation, but bhakti, Shuddha Bhakti.
Pure devotion.
Yeah. What does liberation there refer to? Because it's not clear to me it really means the non-dual experience, but more of wanting to have freedom from suffering in the world rather than...
Liberation from rebirth and suffering.
So it doesn't necessarily mean non-dual though, right? Because I think God is saying, I'll give you freedom, but if you want real Shuddha Bhakti, that's what...
Yeah, but liberation encompasses Advaitic realization.
That's what I wanted to ask. Okay.
I think so. Yes, certainly. Yeah, because for Advaitins themselves, the goal is liberation. But how do you get liberation from rebirth and liberation from all suffering? By knowing Brahman, non-dual pure consciousness.
But can you finish this statement? Why is it hard for her to want to give us the
pure love? Or
why is it hard is not something she answers, but...
I mean, is it that part where it's because if we love her so much, then she becomes like a slave to our love? Is it that sort of thing?
Yeah, but I don't think that's the reason, but it's true. But it's not, the reason is... I don't know what the reason is.
Oh, she didn't finish the song?
Well, no, I don't think she gives a reason, but she just says that, it's the rarest thing in the world. Even you'll find liberated souls, but to find people with Shuddha Bhakti, there's a difference between Shuddha Bhakti, which is pure love of God. What does that mean? What makes pure love of God pure? Does anyone know?
Untainted by desire, unsmitten by selfishness.
Yeah, meaning you don't ask anything from God. You ask nothing in return. You just love. That's pure love.
Love for
And
the
that's
sake of
extremely rare.
loving. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe one reason why is because liberation is, when people get liberation, it's because they want liberation. But people who want nothing but pure love, they don't even want liberation. They want nothing but God. So maybe that's one reason why pure love of God is even higher and more rare, more difficult an attainment. Okay. And with regard to the different kinds of spiritual practice, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, how do they relate to each other? Is one higher than the other? Again, I think it's very clear from this kind of statement he's making. The one goal of life is to cultivate love for God. Of course, he's not excluding the possibility that the goal of life is to realize Advaitic non-dual pure consciousness. I think it would be a mistake. But of course, our friend from our Gita class might pounce on this now and say, see, you just read out a statement that supports my view that bhakti is higher than jnana.
That's the beauty of Ramakrishna. He'll always have you saying, see, he's my guy.
Yeah, he'll give ammunition for everyone, even for Kashmir Shaivites. Yeah. And I attended a philosophy conference on the Kathamrita. There's a whole, I think it's the first in the history of the world. There's a whole, I think, 2 or 3 day conference on the Kathamrita, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna in the original Bengali, held in New Delhi, organized by the Indian Council of Philosophical Research. And it's very interesting. So professors came from all over. I gave a talk on Vijnana Vedanta. And there was a professor from a Sanskrit college in Kolkata who's a follower of Ramanuja's Vishtadvaita. And so he gave a paper arguing that Sri Ramakrishna is Vishtadvaita. And then somebody else came up and says Tantra. And so it's very interesting. Okay. What was Vijnana Vedanta as usual? So this is like right when I think my book had just been published. And so this is like a hot, I was giving the like a talk based on my book. Okay, so now let's analyze in a little bit of detail this first song. I don't want to go through the whole thing, but what I find striking is in Nikhilanji's translation of this song about Mother Kali, he translates the whole thing except for one half phrase. And I've been puzzling over it for about 48 hours now. And I've asked a number of native Bengali speakers, and they thought about it for a long time. There's no obvious... okay, let me first of all tell you which half phrase is the one that Nikhilanji leaves untranslated. Let me read the first few lines, okay, of this song in Bangla. Ke jane kali kemon, shod darshone na pai darashono. Atma ramer atma kali, proman pronomer moton. This is the half phrase. Proman pronomer moton. সে যে ঘটে ঘটে বিরাজ করে ঘটে ঘটে বিরাজ করে ইচ্ছাময়ের ইচ্ছা যেমন. Okay, we'll pause there. This is the first 3 lines of the song in the original Bengali. And the translation which Nikhilanji gives is, with the help of that American poet, who is there that can understand what Mother Kali is? That's fine. Ke jane kali kemon shod darshone na pai darashono. Even the 6 darshanas are powerless to reveal her. That's this shod darshone na pai darashono. What are the 6 philosophies which cannot grasp Divine Mother? Good. These are the 6. Mimamsa, Vedanta, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga. These are the standard kind of 6 schools of Indian philosophy based on the Vedas. They're all based on the Vedas. They accept the authority of the Vedas. And so Ramprasad is saying, none of these schools of philosophy, including Vedanta, none of them can understand you, O Mother, Divine Mother. Okay. Even the 6 darshanas, philosophies, are powerless to reveal Divine Mother. Then, listen carefully. It is she, the scriptures say, that is the inner self of the yogi, who in self discovers all his joy. Okay, it is she, Divine Mother, that is the inner self of the yogi, who in self discovers all his joy. The second line, listen. Atma Ramer Atma Kali, Proman Pronomir Moton. Atma Ram is the person who finds his delight or her delight in the Supreme Atman, having realized the self. All the delight is in the self, not in the external world. Atma Ramer Atma Kali, that self, which is realized by the Atmarama, the one who delights only in the self, is none other than Kali. Fine. Nikhilanji translates that beautifully. He says, it is she, the scriptures say, that is the inner self of the yogi who in self discovers all his joy. But where is that half phrase? after that. Atma Ram and Atma Kali. Then Praman, Pranobed Moton. Praman, Pramana in Sanskrit. Usually it means proof. Even in Bengali it means proof. Pranobed, Pranava. What is the Pranava? Om. Pranava means Om. Praman, Pranobed, Moton. Moton means like. All three words, simple words, put together, I have no idea what he's saying. I don't know what it is. And so I asked several Bengali speakers, I'm not naming names. One of them said, give me 24 hours. And then they came back to me and they gave me this long explanation. I still don't understand what he says. And then, but the basic idea, and then somebody else, another native Bengali speaker, they're both suggesting something along the lines of, yes, I think what Ramprasad is saying, even though it's not quite grammatically correct, the idea is that Kali is also Om. Maybe, but the rest of the song is perfectly grammatically correct. So why suddenly would it become grammatically askew, you know? I want to know how this half phrase, first of all, what it means, second of all, how it fits syntactically with the rest of the line. Mahayoganandaji, who's a good researcher, he found there's another translator of the Kathamrita named Shochindra Kumar Mojumdar. And he has translated the song and these lines as follows. Who can know what Kali is? Even the six philosophies cannot reveal her. That's fine. More or less the same as Nikhilanji. The yogi meditates on her from the Muladhara. Oh, he's mixing up line. Anyway, okay, here's the part where he translates this half phrase. He says, like Om, the source of all, Kali is the inner self of the yogi who delights in the self. So he's rendering this half phrase, Praman Pranobed Moton, as like Om, the source of all. But then he seems to be taking Praman here, as the source of all. I don't know whether that works. And so, here's my task for all of you watching online as well, and for anyone who knows Bengali, here or outside in the online. Let's do some crowdsourcing. And hold on, let me give the assignment first. What I would like is, for any of you who knows Bengali, to look carefully at this song, and especially focusing on this half phrase, Praman Pranobed Moton. And in the YouTube comments, you can suggest your interpretation of this phrase, Praman Pranobed Moton, in the context of this song. I mean, don't just randomly give an explanation of these three words. As the end of this line, Atma Ramer, Atma Kali, Praman Pranobed Moton. And how does that half phrase relate to the preceding words? And how does it make sense in the context of the song as a whole? This is what I would like to know. I don't think there's any easy answer. I think it does involve interpretation. So I'd like to hear your different interpretations of this half phrase, okay? So that's, please, I look forward to seeing some of your interpretations. Yeah.
Does it remotely also mean something like basis, the pramana type?
Maybe, that's
word.
why I was thinking maybe. That's why maybe Mojumdar is right in thinking that there's another alternative interpretation of Praman, not as proof, but as basis. And if so, then he could be onto something. Nikhilanji I think there's a reason why he avoids translating it, because it's just so difficult, maybe. Maybe that's why. Maybe he overlooked it, but I doubt it. He was too good a translator. So I think that he had a lot of trouble understanding what that half phrase might have meant in the context of the song. Mojumdar has done his best. And so, yeah, do you agree with Mojumdar's translation? I'll just tell you one more time. What is Mojumdar's translation? Like Om, the source of all, Kali is the inner self of the yogi who delights in the self. So do you agree with Mojumdar? Do you disagree? Do you have your own interpretation?
Yeah, because of the source, I was thinking replacement word is basis of all.
Yeah, but can pramana mean basis? That's the question. Maybe it can,
because in Telugu some of these Sanskrit words are almost same pramana.
So does pramana in Telugu mean source or basis?
No, that's what I'm trying to remember because I've heard it used in, so I can ask.
So that's an interesting question. Pramana, can it mean source or basis? And if so, then maybe Mojumdar's reading is the correct one. So in any case, I don't know the answer. I don't know what the meaning of this phrase is, Praman Pranobed Moton. I would like to know. And so let's crowdsource and put our heads together and try to figure it out. Okay, thank you so much. Do we have any more questions? Any online questions that you want to tackle? Yeah, we'll conclude the class after we get some questions here. So should I open?
No, he's going to do it.
Where is the gospel? It's not showing up here in my feed. Okay. Then I have to go to this. Gospel, there we go. Whoa. Well, yeah, to go through, yeah. Okay, so hold on.
Don't read them out.
No, I won't do that. Okay. Okay, I'm going to read one of these. What should devotees of Ramakrishna follow? To realize oneness with Brahman and become one with it? Or to remain in God's abode in eternally loving service to Him? As jivas, we cannot have both. The thing is, what should we follow? It's not about what should we follow. What should we strive for, maybe, right? What's the goal? And the goal depends on your temperament. If the question is, what should be our spiritual practice? Is it possible to combine jnana with bhakti? Jnana yoga with bhakti yoga? If you were, M asked Sri Ramakrishna this question in one place. At least he asked, can you combine jnana with bhakti? Not necessarily jnana yoga and bhakti yoga, but can you combine jnana and bhakti? And Sri Ramakrishna gets a little annoyed. And he says, don't ask those questions. That's for avatars. That's for incarnations. Which is interesting, because where does it leave the rest of us? I personally feel you can, but that you need one to be the kind of anchor in your spiritual practice, and the other one can also be supplemental. But to equally be doing both, I think you're gonna end up spreading yourself thin or not making much spiritual progress. It seems to be that would be one reason why Sri Ramakrishna was a little bit irritated with M in daring to suggest that we can combine knowledge with love. See, I predicted it. Now, Devoto de Ramakrishna has pounced as I predicted. Here's the crux of the whole thing. Love for God is the goal of life. This is not just the center of Sri Ramakrishna's teaching. It is, in fact, the totality of the teaching. You can then seek God without conceiving, okay, so he's really having a field day with this. So I'll let him have a field day. I don't know. I'll give that to you, my friend. All right. Okay. Are there other questions here? Okay.
You need to have somebody filter this one.
Mazumdar's. Bhattacharya S. already agrees with Mazumdar's interpretation. Mazumdar's interpretation of this particular portion is correct, it seems. So one Bengali says, how do I know he's Bengali? Because of the last name, Bhattacharya. He thinks that Mazumdar's interpretation is correct. What do other people think? Do you agree with Mazumdar here? Pramana then would mean source of all somehow. So is that accurate? Okay, but with regard to Devoto de Ramakrishna, this Brazilian devotee, I would just say again that you have to take Sri Ramakrishna's teachings as a whole, and if you take them as a whole, I don't think you find him consistently privileging bhakti as a higher goal than Advaitin's goal of Advaitic realization. And more importantly, I don't think he ever says that Advaitins have to attain the love of God. I don't think he ever says that, because they don't want that to be the goal. They don't want to love God as the end goal. They want to become sugar, right? And so he doesn't. So what I would like to see, if you want to sustain this interpretation, and I agree with you that taken in isolation, these kinds of statements may support your kind of reading. You need to. The only way to convince me is to take into account all the other statements that Sri Ramakrishna makes in the other 1,000 or so pages in the Gospel, and reconcile all of them. That's the task before you. So you've got to write your own book, essentially. And then I'll read it, and then we can talk. Okay. Any questions from the in-person audience?
Yeah. So is there a way to understand Aprakshana Buddhi in the light of Vijnanavada?
How would you parse Aparokshana Buddhi in the light of Vijnanavad?
You mean the text Aparokshana?
No, the means of knowing to which it refers.
The means of Aparokshana Buddhi just means in a general sense direct realization, right?
Yes.
Aparoksha means immediate, and Anubhuti means realization. So what's the question?
Does it only apply to a jnana sense of realization of intuiting the self?
In the context of that text, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a classical Advaitic text.
Yes. So you can't use that word outside of that tradition.
Why can't you? Of course you can, because the two terms are kind of fair game for anyone. Even
Right.
the Kashmir Shaivites or
Can use
Bhaktas can use. Yeah, you can have Aparoksha Anubhuti of Vishnu. Why not?
Oh. Okay. But the Vijnanavad Aparakshana Bhuti would be the direct intuitive realization that God is both impersonal and with form and has become all of this.
Yeah.
Right? That would be the same. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Aparokshanubhuti just takes different forms. But if you're referring to the way it's defined in that specific classical Advaitic text, then of course it becomes very narrow. But it just means literally direct spiritual realization, right? And so that can take many different forms. Like the elephant, you wanted us to talk about the elephant, so we can talk. But the different blind men are touching different parts of the elephant. Each one of them is enjoying Aparokshanubhuti. But one is having Aparokshanubhuti of the tail, another one's having Aparokshanubhuti of the trunk, another one's having Aparokshanubhuti of the fur. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
They're all directly touching different parts of the elephant.
But there's no Aparokshanubhuti of the elephant.
There is, the person with vision. Now, still, we have to add another caveat. We might say, well, that's the Vijnani. In a sense, it is, because the Vijnani has a more expansive knowledge of God, realization of God, than the people who are only realizing some aspect.
But he won't say that, right?
But the Vijnani doesn't claim to have known the whole of God.
Exactly.
That's important. And so there's a kind of disanalogy here. We don't want to push the parable too far. And we don't want Sri Ramakrishna to be claiming that the Vijnani realized the whole of God, because he denies that. Because then otherwise it would contradict his ant in the Sugar Hill story and other things.
I like the ant in the Sugar Hill.
Yes.
It feels like to be so overwhelmed with my own path and in love with my own path so much that I get how it could be like, wow, how could I even,
How could you even what?
Just like, I'm not going to be able to get the whole anthill, nor would
Right.
I even care to.
Don't,
now that
yeah.
I have my grain of sugar.
You don't
in
need
that.
to. And he
Right.
gives another example. There's a beautiful Ganga river flowing from the top of India all the way going down to the bottom of Kanyakumari, South India, or wherever that is, wherever it ends. And he says, to touch the Ganga, you don't have to run your finger from the very top, the Gomukh, the source of the Ganga, going all the way. To touch it at any point, you've touched the Ganga. He says, you can realize God in any form or aspect. That means you've realized God. You don't need to realize God as a whole. And that's not even possible. Nobody can realize God as a whole in his infinitude, because there's no limit to God. Yeah.
Do you think it just connects to like when Ramakrishna said, "Don't count the trees, eat the mango"? Like what's the difference between that and like trying to know which, like, which path, or comparing the paths?
Well, yeah, okay, you're saying, well, is it related to Sri Ramakrishna's teaching about when you come to a mango orchard, instead of counting the leaves and speculating about you've come to eat mangoes, eat mangoes. Mm-hmm. Yes and no, I think, because the thing is, this is also about spiritual practice, which is the means to eating the mango. And there's a question about how we should engage in spiritual practice, what we should do and what we should not do. And I think Sri Ramakrishna's position is different yogas suit different temperaments. So there's certain people who just feel inclined toward the path of jnana, so let them practice jnana, and then they'll realize the goal of their path through that. But don't force everybody to practice jnana, and don't say that jnana is higher than other paths. So I really say, so the other analogy used, which I like, is about a mother cooking different kinds of fish preparations for 5 different children. One is a baby, weak stomach, and so she'll make fish soup for him. Another one, strong, hardy constitution, likes unhealthy food. She'll make fish fry. And a third one is baked or whatever, fillet of fish or whatever. So does it make any sense to say that the fish fry is objectively better than the fish soup? No, it's a matter of temperament and preference, what you like. So I think it's the same way with these yogas, these different spiritual practices.
But when you do have brothers and sisters, they will try to shove their food in your mouth.
Yeah.
You know?
So that's
like,
that's why you need a strong mother.
Yeah, exactly.
To hold the kids apart. Exactly. All right. Okay. On that note, strong mother. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.